When we think of ancient Egypt, we think of the monuments, the pyramids, the pharaohs, the gold, the hieroglyphs. But there's something we tend to forget about the Egyptians, something that makes them unique among all the peoples I cover on this channel. They drew what they saw, obsessively. For 3,000 years, they carved and painted the world around them onto tomb walls and temple columns and ceremonial palettes. And a huge part of that world was its wildlife. The Egyptians left us the most detailed visual record of the natural world of any ancient civilization on Earth, which means we can do something remarkable. We can look at their art and their bones and their writings and reconstruct, animal by animal, the living landscape they actually walked through. And when you do that, you find something startling. Because the Egypt of the pharaohs was not the empty desert we picture today. It was teeming. It looked less like the modern Sahara and more like the Serengeti. And most of the great animals that filled it are now gone. Some vanished from Egypt and some vanished from the earth entirely. Today, let me take you back to see the world through Egyptian eyes. Let me show you the animals they saw that you never will. But first, you have to understand why it was so full of life, because that's the key to this entire story, and it's also the tragedy at the heart of it. 6,000 years ago, before the first pyramid was ever raised, North Africa was a different planet. The Sahara wasn't a desert, it was green, a landscape of lakes, grasslands and monsoon rains, dotted with vegetation that scientists call the African humid period, or the Green Sahara. And the Nile Valley running through it was a lush corridor absolutely stuffed with wildlife. Researchers who've catalogued the animals from Egyptian art and remains have counted around 37 species of large mammals living in the region back then. Today, there are 8. That collapse from 37 down to 8 is the story we're telling. And the Egyptians, across their 3,000 years, watched a huge part of it happen. They were both witnesses to and participants in one of the best documented ecological unravelings in human history. So let's meet the vanished. And let's start with the true monsters, the ones that could kill a person, the hippopotamus. Now, hippos aren't globally extinct, but they are utterly gone from Egypt, and their relationship with the Egyptians was one of the most intense of any animal, because the hippo was genuinely dangerous. It lived right there in the Nile, the lifeblood of the civilization, and it was aggressive, territorial, and capable of destroying crops overnight and killing anyone who got in its way. The Egyptians both feared and revered it. They personified the danger of the hippo in a goddess, Taweret, a protective deity with a hippo's body worshipped as a guardian of childbirth. And at the same time, hippo hunting was a royal ritual, a symbolic act of the pharaoh imposing order over the forces of chaos. There are beautiful, vivid tomb scenes of Egyptians spearing hippos from papyrus boats. It was a national drama played out for millennia, and eventually the Egyptians won. The hippo was hunted and squeezed out of the Nile entirely, a creature that shaped their mythology, gone from their world. The same fate met the Nile crocodile, again not globally extinct, but extinct in Egypt. And its story is even more striking, because the Egyptians took reverence to an extraordinary level. They had a crocodile god, Sobek, ruler of the waters. They built a whole city the Greeks called Crocodilopolis, where sacred crocodiles were kept, fed honey wine and cakes by priests, adorned with gold bracelets and jeweled anklets, and then, when they died, mummified and buried in sacred tombs. Archaeologists have found not just adult crocodiles, but entire clutches of mummified baby crocodiles and eggs. This was an animal so feared and so respected that they turned it into a god and embalmed it like a king. And today, there are no wild crocodiles left in Egypt. The god was driven out of his own river. Now let's move from the water to the great cats. And here we hit the first animal that is genuinely, globally extinct: the Barbary lion. Also called the North African lion, this was the great lion of the Mediterranean coast and North Africa, and it loomed enormous in the Egyptian mind. Lions were power, they were royalty, they were the sun. The Egyptians linked them to the fierce goddess Sekhmet, a lion-headed deity of war and destruction, and to the god Mahahes. The Sphinx itself, that vast guardian with the body of a lion, is a monument to how deeply the lion sat at the centre of their idea of kingship and protection. Pharaohs kept lions, hunted lions, and identified themselves with lions. And this particular lion is now gone from the earth. Hunted relentlessly over the centuries, the wild Barbary lion was driven to extinction, with the last ones vanishing from the mountains of North Africa in the 20th century. The living inspiration for one of history's most powerful symbols, extinct. And it wasn't the only great cat the Egyptians knew that has since vanished from their land. Cheetahs, which the Egyptians tamed and kept as hunting companions and status symbols, walked on leashes by royalty, are gone from Egypt now too. Leopards, whose skins were worn by high priests as sacred garments, gone. The Egypt of the pharaohs was a land of big cats. The modern one is not. Now for the giants, and one that's a true, distinct casualty: the North African elephant. This was a smaller subspecies of elephant, closer in size to an Asian elephant than to the huge bush elephants of the African south, and it once ranged across North Africa. The Egyptians knew it. Early rock art and records depict elephants in the region, though they seem to have had a complicated relationship with it, since a herd of elephants is catastrophic for farmland. This is likely the same elephant that, centuries later, the general Hannibal would famously march across the Alps. And it too is now extinct. Driven out by hunting for ivory, by habitat loss as the land dried, and by the pressures of expanding human civilization. The elephants of North Africa are simply gone. And they had company in their exodus. The giraffe, which the Egyptians found so striking that they may have based a hieroglyph on it, once roamed the fringes of their world and is now long gone from the region. The aurochs, the massive wild ancestor of all domestic cattle, a beast far larger and more formidable than any cow alive today, with sweeping horns, was hunted by the Egyptians as a symbol of raw power, a worthy adversary for a pharaoh to conquer. And the aurochs is now globally extinct. The very last one died in a forest in Poland in the 17th century. But the Egyptians saw them alive and painted them and hunted them. Wild African wild dogs, roan antelope, wildebeest, warthogs, spotted hyenas, all recorded in Egyptian art, all vanished from Egypt. So what happened? How did the Serengeti of the Nile become the empty desert we know? And the answer is a grim, slow 1-2 punch. Climate and civilization, working together over thousands of years. The first blow was the drying of the Sahara. Starting around 5,000 years ago, the Green Sahara began to die. The monsoons faltered, the lakes evaporated, the grasslands turned to sand. And, here's a haunting irony, that very drying is part of what created ancient Egypt. As the surrounding land became uninhabitable desert, People were funneled inward, concentrated along the reliable waters of the Nile. And that concentration of people is what gave rise to the pharaonic civilization in the first place. The same drought that doomed the animals built the empire that finished them off. Because that was the second blow. Us. As Egyptian civilization grew, it needed land and food and protection. Animals that damaged crops, the hippos, the elephants, were exterminated. Animals that threatened people or livestock, the lions, the hyenas, were hunted down. And predators and prey that depended on the shrinking wild spaces simply had nowhere left to go. And here's the fascinating part that researchers have uncovered. By tracking these extinctions through 6,000 years of Egyptian art, they found the animals didn't disappear randomly. They vanished in waves. And those waves line up precisely with the great droughts and the political collapses of Egyptian history. Species dropped out of the artwork right around the fall of the Old Kingdom, and again around the fall of the New Kingdom, each aridification event tearing another hole in the web of life. The art itself is a record of the ecosystem coming apart, thread by thread. And that, I think, is the real weight of this story. The ancient Egyptians didn't just live alongside these magnificent animals. They documented their disappearance without ever realizing that's what they were doing. Every hippo hunt painted on a tomb wall, every lion-headed goddess, every mummified crocodile, every fading depiction of an elephant or a giraffe. Each one is a snapshot from a slow-motion extinction, captured by people who thought they were simply drawing their world. They left us a 3,000-year time-lapse of a living landscape dying. And the sobering thing is how familiar the causes are. A changing climate and a growing human demand for land colliding until the wild things had nowhere left to stand. The Egyptians watched the Serengeti of the Nile empty out around them. One god, one guardian, one giant at a time. So the next time you see those tomb paintings, the lions and the hippos and the great horned cattle, look a little closer. You're not just looking at ancient art. You're looking at a memorial, a gallery of the last of them, drawn from life by the last people ever to see them alive. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep looking up.